I swear I only borrowed her coat because of the storm. Nothing romantic, nothing intentional. But the moment I walked into our apartment wearing it, my alien roommate froze, and every glowing mark on her skin flared like a warning I didn't understand. Her heartbeat hum changed, the air thickened, and suddenly she was staring at me as if I'd triggered something sacred, something dangerous. I didn't know what I'd done, or why she stepped toward me like she couldn't stop herself. All I knew was this: whatever mistake I'd made, it couldn't be undone, and she whispered one sentence that made my blood run cold. "You shouldn't have worn my coat." I didn't plan on accepting a courtship claim the night I walked home wearing what was technically someone else's coat. It was, as most important life changes are, the result of a stupid series of choices. A rainstorm that refused to leave, a forgotten umbrella, and Mira, my alien roommate, who had the habit of leaving everything in the most inconvenient places. She had a coat the color of deep twilight, streaked with faint bioluminescent veins that shimmered like tucked-away constellations. It fit me like destiny shoved a hand into the sleeve, and because I am at the core, lazy and easily flattered by warmth, I shrugged it on and went home. Mira was not what my brain kept calling an alien roommate. She was far too human to fit a headline, and far too not human for any of my friends' crude sci-fi metaphors. She had skin that, under low light, traced the paths of her emotions. Pale lavender lines, brightening when she laughed, curling indigo when she focused. Her hair fell like a cascade of metallic filaments, restless and whispering in ways my brain tried hard to ignore. Her eyes were the sort of thing that made you forget sentences. They were a triple-lensed arrangement, each iris a small galaxy that blinked in sequence when she was amused. And this was not a detail to be ignored. She emitted, faintly, a rhythm that I learned to call her hum, a soft, musical heartbeat that seemed to sync with her feelings. She was, in short, striking. She was also literal to a fault. At 28, my human assumptions came packaged with sarcasm and a fondness for pizza. Mira, at whatever stage you measure for her species, came with a cultural program that put pragmatism where flirtation lived for humans. She would state facts with the kind of calm that made courtrooms feel theatrical. She would, for instance, say, "It is raining. You are damp. You will acquire hypothermia within 2 hours." Her conversation had all the warmth of an emergency broadcast and half the charm. But when she smiled, when those phosphorescent markings along her collarbone flared, I found myself answering her like a man in a conversation with gravity. The coat belonged to her. She'd lent it earlier that evening, claiming an Arctic catalog level of heat sensitivity reduced her thermal tolerance, and therefore necessitated a constant overcoat. I'd laughed and said something like, "You're not built for winter." And she had replied, "You are built for drama," which was, as sarcasm goes, disappointingly accurate. What I didn't know, couldn't possibly have known, because no caption in any interspecies etiquette guide I'd glimpsed in college covered it, was that on her homeworld there existed a cultural and biological construct where sharing the outermost garment of another was not merely polite. It was a claim. A claim, I later learned, was the kind of compact that arrived like a quietly humming grenade, socially binding, biologically resonant, and in some cases, the prelude to an involuntary physiological cascade. On Mira's homeworld, the coat was a token of courtship. The wearer would accept an offered coat in ritual and participate in a coupling dance so old their son had stories about it. Most of the time, the dance was formal, arranged, and consensual. In apartment 4B, it was improvised and involved me, an umbrella, and too many leftover takeout containers. I discovered the claim the next morning. "Why are you wearing my coat?" Mira asked, stepping into the kitchen with a mug that steamed in amusing geometric patterns. She brewed tea like she plotted weather. She stood by the island, an accusatory silhouette, her glow soft but serious. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but probably failed. "I know I often look like a man waiting for the punchline." "Because I was cold," I said. "And it's a great coat. It makes me feel like I could helm a star freighter, or at least a very decisive bus." She regarded me with the sort of blink that, if human, would qualify as a shrug. Her hum changed pitch. "On my planet, coat lending protocols are specific. There is value in this action. Are you aware of—" "No," I cut in. I was not aware. She folded her arms, and the luminescence along her forearms brightened, sketching nervous constellations. "I did not expect you to accept," she said. "Acceptance is intentional. It is usually expressed with formal congratulations." The practical side of my brain demanded to know what formal congratulations entailed. The romantic, less practical side, unfortunately vocalized as sarcasm, answered, "Is that traducible to coffee and a commemorative plaque?" Mira tilted her head, that alien geometry of her skull catching the light, and then she did something both infuriating and disarming. She stepped forward and, without preamble, sat very close. "I want you to picture the moment with me. I was cutting a tomato. There are details you don't realize will stick until they do. The tang of steel on skin, the sticky sweetness of the tomato, the dull thud of rain on the window. Then there was Mira's thigh against mine. She sat on the counter without asking, because in her world, proximity was a normal social tool. People pressed together like a chorus to share warmth and pheromones, the way we share playlists. Her coat brushed the side of my arm, and a soft smell, like ozone and jasmine and something very old, rose to my nose. She was close enough that I felt the soft undulation of her breath graze my cheek. The hum in her chest, a sound that had always been a comforting background to our mornings, shifted into a pattern I had never heard. It was quicker. There was a tonal brightening, a shimmering that rose up the column of her throat and spread like starlight through her skin. The luminescent veins along her collarbone flashed, tracing a fiery pathway. "Are you all right?" I asked, because some instincts are more human than logic, and I did not want her to be unwell while we shared a rain-soaked Thursday. "I am experiencing a physiological reaction," she said honestly, as if reciting from an instruction manual. Her voice had the flatness of someone reading the weather. "Today, cloud. Tomorrow, emotional precipitation." My hands, still on the knife and tomato, betrayed me by trembling. "You mean you're—" She met my eyes, and for the first time, her triple-lensed irises synchronized into a single, luminous gaze. The hum softened into a harmonic vibration that I could feel in my bones. Her skin warmed beneath my fingers where the coat brushed. "I am triggered," she said. "In my species, touch near the heart and the exchange of garments can initiate a bonding reflex. It escalates if not mitigated." If that sentence had been in a horror movie, it would have been spoken by a character who gets eaten immediately. Fortunately for both of us, this was a romance where logic, awkwardness, and improbable science mingled. "Oh," I said, "modern humans have two prime modes for handling revelations of cosmic import: panic or dry humor. I chose dry humor because it felt safer. And mitigation is—" A small, intensely human expression creased her face, making the glow along her jawline ripple. Prolonged physical proximity and synchronized breathing can stabilize. It is recommended to maintain contact for a period equal to 3 heart cycles of my species, approximately 11 minutes for me. My brain did the math and supplied a million jokes about timed intimacy that I did not say because Mira had a way of looking at me that made my jokes sound like public service announcements. Instead, I said, "So, hug me." She blinked. The 3 irises did the little nervous flutter thing. Affirmative. I will initiate a stabilizing embrace. And then she did. The embrace was not cinematic at first. It was bookshelf close, practical. Her arms looped around my shoulders, firm and warm. The coat, heavy with rain, smelled of cold air and something like memory. Her hum dipped into a low bass that thrummed through my sternum. I felt, with striking clarity, the cadence of her heartbeat synchronize with mine. The very small, very ridiculous human part of my brain that had been waiting for a romantic story to land was suddenly convinced that I was in one. When people talk about chemistry, they use metaphors involving flames and electricity. What I felt was both and neither, a gentle wiring of proximity. The luminescence along her neck flared, tinting her skin into a watercolor of blush. Her breath hitched and then steadied, as if she'd found a tempo. I wrapped my arms around her waist. Her back was warm and textured, in ways my fingertips cataloged with embarrassing thoroughness. We stood like that, rain tickling the windows, the city breathing outside in distant bright pockets. Our timed embrace counting down somewhere in the part of my head that kept score. 11 minutes felt like an hour, and also 2 seconds. It was intimate without being sexual in the blunt, explicit way, and in ways that were more electric than words. She smelled like ozone and tea, and her hum shifted in pitch to mimic the rhythm of my own breathing. I counted with her. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. I realized, with a startled little lurch, that her breath tasted faintly of star salt. We were halfway through the 3rd minute when the kitchen door burst open and in walked Lena. Lena, my human friend / coworker, ambiently breezy and exactly the sort of person who arrived like a sunbeam into our dim apartment, froze at the sight. For about 3 heartbeats, she looked like she had seen a unicorn wearing a trench coat and making out with a lamp. "Hey, I brought," Lena started, holding a box of pastries like a peace offering. The pastries were barred from the scene by our tableau, which I'll admit was dramatic. Mira, wrapped against me, shone with that startled, embarrassed luminescence, the lines along her cheeks strobing like someone flipping a switch on an undersea light show. Her hum peaked into a high crystalline chime. Lena's eyes narrowed, scanning me, then Mira, then the shimmering coat clinging to my shoulders. New thing?" she said, conversationally, the way you ask about a new app or a surprise bill. The hum in Mira's chest changed again, sharp, protective. I had seen her react protectively once before. A courier had tried to take a package meant for her, and she'd responded by stating in a very calm voice that the courier's life insurance might be jeopardized. This was different. A wedge of possessiveness had slid between us, and the coating of biology overlaid culture like varnish. "My friend Lena," I said. My voice came out a little too cheerful, which is to say, I was pretending to be nonchalant and failing. "Lena, this is Mira. Mira, Lena. We, live together because the universe is weird. Mira came out of the embrace, minutely, but not fully. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the three lenses rotated in such a way that they made a pattern I did not have words for. She extended a hand, and with it came a faint wave of scent, something sharp and sweet that made my chest feel tindered. You are, visitor. Welcome. You are in the vicinity of someone who is currently bonded. Her definition of bonded left room for very little ambiguity. The luminescent lines along her throat traced the word for me in an alphabet I only understood as urgent warmth. Lena, bless her, did what Lena does. She laughed, and the laugh was an attempt to sink a flag of normalcy into the flood. Oh, bonded, huh? That's adorable. Is this a new phase? Mira, are you like introducing house rules now? Mira's hum went into a low oscillation. She did not comment on rules. Instead, she folded her arms, the gesture both casual and barring. The luminescence on her forearms made a thin, stubborn line. On my planet, she said, as if revealing a weather report, a claim implies two beings are temporarily considered mated, and thus under cultural obligations regarding exclusivity and public marking. She paused. You should not be near them. If this were a different story, Lena would have laughed and made a joke about exclusive discounts. Instead, she set down the pastry box and, for reasons I did not get, glanced at me with an expression that asked, without words, is this an acceptable apocalypse? I had a fraction of a second to fix everything with a joke. I failed on purpose to keep the scene honest. We're bonded, I said, because lying seemed worse than embarrassing exposure. Temporary, rain-related. Lena blinked, and then with the kind of acceptance that only friends give. She shrugged and plucked a pastry. Well, if you two plan on forming a new political entity, can you at least let me have a Danish? Pause. Her casualness was a balm. Mira's luminescence receded to a tender glow, and her hum softened like a cat resuming a purr after being startled. I exhaled. We all laughed, because laughter is a solvent for awkwardness, and because Lena set a Danish down on the counter with the perfect amount of theatrical flourish. But as she reached for it, the movement was the kind that made Mira's possessive cord vibrate again. Small, protective, not entirely rational. Her hand flew out, faster than I'd seen her move before, and closed over the pastry like a talon. The act was absurd and yet not. Mira, the most literal roommate in 2 time zones, had a cultural reflex manifesting as sudden, comic jealousy over breakfast. You will not take that, she said, voice calm, eyes fierce. Lena blinked at the pastry in Mira's hand, then at Mira, then at me. That's the most alien thing I've seen today, and I work in biotech. I laughed because that was what I did when my brain was trying to avoid the sensation, blooming, where panic might have been. Mira's hum shifted again, deeper, a small vibration along my spine that had nothing to do with pastry, and everything to do with the fact that we were orbiting a new gravitational center together. For a second, everything felt unstable, like a chemical experiment in a lab where someone forgot the safety goggles. It was a mood, a pressure, a taut string hum. The clock on the oven ticked loud in the sudden acoustics of our small living room. My fingers, waving in my lap like someone conducting a private orchestra, found Mira's hand and squeezed. Her luminescence surged, and her hum rose into a pleading, almost musical cadence. Her free hand pressed to the spot right over her heart. Completion may be necessary, she said, if the reflex continues to destabilize. The sentence landed with the weight of an announcement, you may have to do something intimate. Not sexual in a graphic way, but something that would mean more than a handshake. The rain kept tapping the windows, as if the city itself were an audience, holding its breath. I swallowed. The idea was ridiculous and utterly, uncontestably perfect, and as deeply uncertain as I felt. About biology, about consent nuance, about the idea of being named in an alien courtship. There was a steadiness in Mira's eyes that made me realize how much I wanted to be steady for her. Then, I said, because I had a terrible habit of being practical in the face of cosmic romance, we should probably figure out what completion is. Mira's lips, unfamiliar and lovely and imperfectly human, quirked. The luminescence at her temples anchored into a small, almost mischievous glow. I will explain, she said. But first, you must remove the coat. The words were soft, and in them lived 1,000 tiny meanings. I reached up, fingers fumbling at the wet fabric. As I slipped it off, I felt seen. Not in the exploitative way of a stranger's flashlight, but in the halting, beautiful way of someone taking the risks to see you in the middle of a thunderstorm. And then, with the coat in my hands like an artifact that had changed everything, Mira leaned forward and kissed me. Not a completion. Damn it, this story is full of false starts. But a kiss that was the shape of a question and a promise. Her lips were cool and electric. Her hum cascaded into a chord that answered something inside my chest I hadn't known was listening. We broke apart because Lena cleared her throat with the delicate timing of someone who knows she's walked into a private moment and does not want to be velvet rope rude. Mira's cheeks flared into a constellation of crimson, and she drew in a breath that made her luminescent lines flare like a sunrise. You've created a diplomatic incident, Lena observed, eyebrow arched. Affirmative, Mira said, with an earnest tilt of her head, which will require formalization. I stared at her. She stared back. The kettle whistled an impatient song in the background. Outside, the rain turned from steady to purposeful. Inside, something new had formed between us. A gentle gravity that was equal parts biology, culture, and two people who had accidentally fallen into the complicated geometry of one another. And that, dear reader, if you're still with me, was the beginning of a story that would, over the course of nights and awkward breakfasts and stolen glances under the glow of her skin, become less accidental and more chosen. But for now, standing in the kitchen with a wet coat in my hands and a pastry truce between two species, I realized I'd done something irreversible. I had accepted her coat, and apparently she had accepted me. We hadn't yet decided whether acceptance was an agreement or a warning. We had only just started to find out. The kettle shrieked again, and, like an unseen cue, something inside Mira's hum altered. There was a whisper of urgency, a tremor that suggested the biological clock for completion might be closer than she'd first claimed. My heart, human and stubborn, did a sick little flip. I tightened my fingers in the coat, as if holding on to cloth might steady the sudden tilt of everything. That sounded like urgency, I said, voice small. What happens if we don't? Mira inhaled, her glow mapping thought. Her eyes were very serious. Then, she said, and the syllables were low and strangely intimate, we will have to perform the ceremony. Lena, who had been watching us as if she'd been handed the script to an increasingly eccentric play, looked between us and slowly set down her Danish. Ceremony? She repeated. Do you get to wear matching cloaks? Is there a playlist? Mira's smile, for once, was as sharp as a comet. My people do not use playlists, she said. We use atmosphere. And with that, the world outside our apartment felt a little too quiet. As if the city itself were leaning toward the window, like an eager audience. 11 minutes had been an appetizer. The entree, I was beginning to suspect, involved more than breath and timing. It would require a choice. I swallowed. The rain tapped faster. Then show me the atmosphere, I said. Mira's hum blossomed into something that sounded dangerously like contentment. Her skin lit up in a map of stars. She reached for my hand. And the doorbell rang. The doorbell had barely finished its polite, neighborly ding when the whole apartment seemed to remember it had things to do. I let the coat slip from my fingers and caught Mira's hand. Because the universe had an odd way of arranging priorities, and mine, apparently, now involved stabilizing an alien species mating reflex. Before the building manager found out, I'd been appropriating someone else's outerwear. Lena opened the door with a smile like she was entering a sitcom and not a chapter in my personal xenobiology textbook. Behind her stood Mrs. Core from 4A, all practical jute bag and half-knit patience, and the postman with a small, suspiciously official-looking envelope tucked under his arm. He looked like a man who had seen things and preferred not to annotate them. Afternoon, Lena said, breezy. We come bearing carbs and the gentle will to be nosy. Core peered in as if the apartment were now exhibiting a transient art installation. Is everything all right? She asked. Not because she was particularly kind, but because the building ran on suspicion and shared sugar. Mira's glow tightened into a narrow band, protective, high alert. Her hum turned into a background chord that hummed a little faster, the way a refrigerator might when someone put something heavy on top of it. The postman cleared his throat and handed over the envelope. It had red trim and a seal that I recognize now as the kind of ornate bureaucracy Mira's people used for messages that meant, "We are watching," or "This requires signatures in triplicate." Mira's fingers closed reflexively around the envelope, and when she opened it, the apartment seemed to dim to make room for the light inside her. Her skin flashed, mapping an anxious constellation. "This is from home," she said. I watched her face, because watching Mira was a habit. She was the place where curiosity met the edges of my comfort, and usually, to my delight, folded into something warm. Now, the fold was an anxious crease. The envelope contained 2 words, and a glyph that looked like a ribbon tied in a loop I couldn't untangle without a linguistics degree. Summons. Completion verification required. Mira, I said, because when your roommate opens a diplomatic envelope that says your accidental courtship has moved into bureaucratic territory, there's a list of things a human pats a couch for, and says, none of which are helpful except one. Do we need cake? Her laugh was small and not quite her normal musical hum. Cake is not mentioned in the cultural codex, she said, but comfort food would be acceptable. Mrs. Carr, who'd been listening with the stoicism of someone who'd raised 3 children and a plant that refused to die, raised an eyebrow. Love letter? She guessed. Her idea of romance was practical. Shepherd's pie and rent paid on time. If this ends with a dowry, I call dibs on the casserole recipe. Lena slapped the counter with the untroubled authority of a woman who trusted pastry to fix most social ruptures. Summons, huh? Like a subpoena, but with more flirting. Mira's hum peaked into a crystalline note that made the window rattle. It is ceremonial, she said. It is not hostile, but the protocol requires the claimant and the claimee to perform the completion act under supervision or official verification to register the bond. The embassy will transmit a verifier, either in person or via remote interface, within 24 to 72 hours. The number 24 made the air in the kitchen turn into a thing that could be pinched. 24 hours was both a long and terrifyingly short time when you were sitting on the cusp of an alien cultural agreement that could label you temporarily mated in an interstellar registry. What exactly does verification involve? I asked, because apparently in my life, I had become the designated question asker for literally everything that involved planets I'd never visited. Mira's eyes moved in a curious, almost comical rhythm as she considered her words. There are levels, she said. Level 1 is purely documentary. Signatures, presence, affirmative statements. Level 2 requires physical contact and demonstration of mutuality. This is often a kiss, though specifics vary. Level 3 is completed only in rare cases and is not usually administered without consent. Her voice softened on that last word, like a stone settling. I may be biologically predisposed, but I will not be forced. I had already decided, without consulting any committee, that I would not be the kind of person who let bureaucratic alien protocol bully someone I liked into anything. I squeezed her hand. Then we'll do level 1 and sign whatever paper makes them satisfied. It was a valiant line, practical, humane, slightly naive. Mira's hum dipped into something like skeptical affection. We should also prepare for the physiological side, she added. If the reflex intensifies, mitigation may not be sufficient. Completion may be required to prevent escalation. The phrase prevent escalation had a way of eating my optimism. I had been clumsy enough to walk home wearing her coat, and now the coat wore me like a walking declaration. There were 3 possible outcomes in my head. A bureaucratic hiccup, a lovely if peculiar story to tell at parties, or something that involved lots of emotional vulnerability and perhaps very awkward customs regarding public marking. Lena, who had been rifling through the pastry box like a diplomat negotiating the terms of an armistice, looked up and grinned. So tomorrow we might get an alien inspector and a very dramatic kiss? This is the roommate upgrade I paid for. I am so in. Mrs. Carr tutted. If this involves children, someone needs to tell me now. Children? Mira repeated, genuinely puzzled. No, that is not implied. Our offspring gestate in communal nurseries and... Lena's eyes widened. Okay, that's a hard pass on the nursery. Also, Mira, maybe avoid anything that implies offspring on the first, what do you call it? Date? Court hearing? Mira's laugh, something like wind chimes struck with a careful hand, dislodged some of the tightness. I have not called it a date, she said. Humans are imprecise. We spent the next hour in a flurry of pragmatic romance. We read the edges of the envelope like it contained the answers to a pop quiz none of us had studied for. We Googled, bad idea, because most pages titled Alien Courtship Rituals were speculative fiction blog posts written by disappointed romantics. And then we narrowed our research to Mira's own files, the ones she kept in a neat archive with tags like culture formalities, health, biomechanics, and personal recipes. There, in the personal folder, under a subheading that translated roughly as household protocols, was a short, handwritten note in Mira's own ink. It read, if you accept a claim unintentionally, do not panic. Breathe. Let the claimer explain. If necessary, call for official verification. Bring Danish. The mention of Danish made me laugh, which made her hum settle into a comfortable resonance. We decided to be pragmatic, prepare for the verifier, attempt to keep things level, and not accidentally invent culture by improvisation. Lena agreed to be our local liaison and pastry witness, a role she took with alarming seriousness. That night, the apartment became a staging ground for nervous, affectionate rehearsal. I tried to practice kissing in the mirror, which is as ridiculous as it sounds and probably not recommended. It involved a lot of throat clearing and awkward pursing. Mira, who had the tact to not laugh at my disastrous attempts, instead offered me guidance with the earnestness of a teacher and the eyes of someone who had memorized 1,000 social protocols. "Relax the jaw," she instructed, tracing a path on my face with a finger that left a brief, cool trail. "Do not try to conquer it. Let it be a mutual movement." "Neither of us should try to conquer anything," I said. "But if this is a test, I'm failing it spectacularly." She smiled, the glow along her temples sketching stars like a map of patient amusement. "You are human. You are charming in your failures." The hours thinned to a close, and dawn arrived with a kind of unimpressed pink light. I slept poorly and dreamed of ribbons and envelopes, and the sensation of being registered in an interstellar ledger. Mira did not sleep much either. I could tell by the way her hum layered gently against my ear as she read by the soft blue of the charger lamp. At one point, she reached out and traced my hand with a fingertip that hummed like a tuning fork. I woke with her fingers still warm and the unmistakable feeling of being acknowledged. The verifier did not arrive that morning. Instead, the building provided its own little subplot, a fire alarm test and the smell of someone downstairs burning toast. The envelope remained on the counter like a small, patient god. The 24-hour window closed into a longer, more patient stretch. We were given time, but not, it seemed, a reprieve. Time, in our case, felt like a stretching membrane. It let us experiment with proximity in ways that were both terrifying and intoxicating. A brush of a shoulder in the hallway, a deliberate leaning in while we watched an old, terrible movie together. There were moments that tasted like tiny betrayals to my autonomy, becoming a person who intentionally smelled her hair, not because I was a creep, but because the scent was strangely consoling, and moments where I realized I liked the hum of her chest as the soundtrack of my afternoons. Jealousy, that odd spice of romance, made small reappearances. Once, Lena mentioned a coworker with a perfectly reasonable name and a penchant for any drama larger than a budget report. Mira's luminescence flickered, not in anger, but in a way that felt like a compass needle aligning to my location. I felt unexpectedly territorial then. Over Mira, over this new constellation of feelings. Like a man who had been given something fragile and beautiful, and was suddenly willing to argue about the best ways to keep it safe. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that her hum shifted into an urgency I could no longer ignore. She'd been reading through the embassy pamphlets, pages on consent, on cultural expectations, on things you were not expected to do during a claim, and her skin had gone a deep, scintillating violet. Her fingers trembled slightly on the paper. "I should contact them," she said, voice tight. "I should request a delay until we have prepared." "No," I said quickly, maybe too quickly. Or, "Well, yes, do it, if it makes you more comfortable." Her laugh was a single bright note, surprised. "You sound very decisive." "I am decisive about one thing. I don't want you to be alone in this. Not because I think this is my responsibility, but because it is my life now, and I would like to be part of it, period. Mira's eyes softened in a way that made the room feel like a cup. She took my face with hands that had both human warmth and the cool sensation of a thing that carried memory in its touch. You are unusual, she said. Most are not willing to accept obligations they do not fully understand. I'm full of surprises, I said, and kissed her then. Short, a punctuation mark, not the long answer I'd been practicing in the mirror. Her hum answered me as if it had been waiting to. It rose and fell and settled like the tide finding a new shore, period. We were interrupted by a soft chime from her personal device. The glyph on the screen matched the envelope seal. A message blinked. Verifier en route. ETA, 12 hours. 12 hours. The number had gravity. It pulled the air toward itself and made my chest tight with the sense of an approaching weather front. Do we wait? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mira's smile hitched, equal parts trepidation and something that might have been excitement. We prepare, she said simply. She stood, and the room seemed to warm with her movement. The luminescent lines along her arms unfurled like planets in orbit. She took my hand and led me toward the window. Outside, the rain had stopped and left the city draped in a clean, electric gloss. On the horizon, a commuter shuttle glinted, and for a moment, I could imagine entire worlds occupying the distance between us and the stars. Do you want to know what I'm thinking? She asked. I blinked. Yes. She leaned her forehead against mine, an intimate gesture on a small scale that felt like opening a book. I am thinking that perhaps we should make a list of things to say if the verifier asks whether the arrangement is consensual, she said. Also, that we should probably have more than one witness. And possibly more Danish, Lena offered from the doorway, triumphant. Yes, Mira said, and her laugh was a bright comet. Danish. I laughed too, because it was absurd and lovely, and because the world had tilted into improbable normality, an alien and a human, and a very unflappable friend turning the prospect of interstellar bureaucracy into something like a sleepover. The idea of a verifier arriving to witness our awkward, fumbling, honest attempts at mutuality had the ridiculousness of a reality show and the tenderness of a slow sunrise. We made lists. We practiced phrases. We ate pastries in solemn ritual. We talked about the silly, the serious, the things that mattered, and the things that didn't. There were moments, soft, unplanned, where Mira would hum low, and I would find myself leaning into the sound, because it made the room feel less like a set piece and more like home. As evening folded into night, the stakes tightened. The timer on the verifier blinked its way down to hours. I found my thoughts returning to the contact earlier, to the kiss under the weight of an envelope and a pastry box, and to the way Mira's skin had lit at my touch. I realized I was not only curious about the ritual, I was increasingly certain that if completion did prove necessary, I would rather it be with someone who read the emergency protocols like poetry, who could be literal and tender in equal measure. But there was a thin, insistent nervousness pricking the edges of everything. What if the verifier demanded more than we were ready to give? What if our knees betrayed us in front of an interstellar official? What if, less practical and more human, I found myself wanting this to be more than bureaucratic paperwork? You okay? Mira asked, because she noticed the small things, like a study in how light bends around a person's face. I think so, I said, and the truth in that sentence settled like a small stone sinking. But I'm scared. She hummed against my chest, and the sound was a salve. So am I, she admitted. But fear does not always mean danger. Sometimes it means your life is rearranging itself. Her hands were warm. The luminescence that traced her smile glowed like permission. Outside, unseen and unassuming, a shuttle flicked its lights along the skyline. Inside, in our small, cozy kitchen, the envelope sat like a thing waiting to be opened. The clock on the oven ticked loud and true. 12 hours hummed down. We leaned into each other and let the world wait. At midnight, just as I drifted briefly toward sleep, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown sender. The text preview was a single line, and it read, "We will arrive sooner than expected." My heart did the impossible thing and jumped into my throat. I jolted awake so fast I nearly launched my phone into orbit. Beside me, Mira's hum shifted, subtle at first, like a whisper at the base of my spine, then climbing into a sharper harmonic that meant alertness in her species. Her eyes opened in sequence, left, right, center. A ripple of luminescent violet traveled down her cheekbones. "Earlier than expected arrival," she murmured, voice still soft with the edges of sleep. That usually indicates urgency, or a particularly enthusiastic verifier. Enthusiastic sounds bad, I whispered back, because humans whisper when we panic. What kind of enthusiastic? Like clipboard and pen enthusiastic? Or "I'll need to inspect your soul" enthusiastic? She blinked, then tilted her head in thought. In my culture, enthusiasm in officials often manifests as extremely thorough oversight. Cool, I said. So soul inspection adjacent. Her lips pulled into a small smile. Possibly. The clock on my phone read 2:16 a.m., which meant our 12-hour countdown had been cheerfully ignored by whatever interstellar bureaucracy governed Mira's species. Regulations, apparently, were only guidelines when someone smelled an interesting case. I sat up and scrubbed a hand across my face. "Mira, what exactly do they need to verify? Because if we have to perform something, I should probably at least be wearing pants." Her luminescence flickered. A blush. I had learned her blush came in gradients. This one was soft rose gold. Level 2 verification typically requires demonstration of mutuality, she said calmly, and an explanation of the initiation conditions of the bond. In English, they will ask why you accepted my coat. Because it was cold, and soft, and smelled nice. You left it on the table. It was fate. She hummed thoughtfully, an appreciative sound. That may help. The hum vibrated lightly against the mattress. The air in the room tasted faintly metallic, as if her emotions subtly altered the atmosphere. My heartbeat synced to hers, not metaphorically, but because her species' bonding reflex encouraged cardiac entrainment when in close proximity. I should have been terrified. I was. But also, I was weirdly, hopelessly drawn in, just as I reached for a shirt. There was a soft thrum outside, like a distant engine idling, or a heartbeat amplified through the sky. Mira stiffened immediately. "They're here." I froze. "We are so underprepared." "You practiced mirror kissing for 18 minutes, she pointed out. "You are more prepared than you believe." Hey, becoming verified lit proficient wasn't in any online tutorial. Her laugh, gentle, musical, softened the rising anxiety. Then came the strong knock, a sound too polite to be urgent, too soft to be human, almost melodic. Mira stood first, gathering her coat and smoothing her hair with an elegance that made my breath hitch. Even half asleep, she looked like a being sculpted out of starglow and quiet resolve. "Remain close," she said. If the reflex escalates under stress, I will need grounding contact. Grounding contact? Like holding hands? Or shoulder-to-shoulder touch? Or, she swallowed. A flicker of teal flashed across her throat. Or small kisses, she whispered. My stomach dropped into the basement. Understood. She reached the door, then glanced back at me with a look that was both anxious and fiercely protective, as though she intended to defend me against her own species if necessary. Then she opened it. Outside stood the verifier. Not a towering alien, not a droning hologram, not an emissary in a cape of starlight. It was a woman, human-looking almost. Her skin was a pale opal shade, hair arranged in tight braids woven with threads of light. Her eyes, though, those triple-lensed spirals, matched Mira's exactly. She wore a suit that shimmered like midnight tidewater, and her expression was an impeccable blend of curiosity and professionalism. She offered a polite, shallow bow. I am Verifier Sarah, she said in a voice like a choir sung through velvet. Designation, Harmony Level Orbiter. Bond Claim Assessment. May I enter? End of period, said Mira. Stepping aside, Sarah walked in with the graceful precision of someone who had judged dozens of rituals and enjoyed each one. Her gaze landed on me. You must be the human who accepted the garment. Not a question, a verdict. Yes, I said, but I didn't know what it meant. Not that I wouldn't have. I mean, if I had known, maybe I would have. Well, I don't know what I would have done, but probably something less idiotic than... Mira gently placed a hand on my arm. Grounding, stabilizing. Sarah watched the motion with quiet satisfaction. Physical synchronization has already begun, she noted. Not fully, Mira said quickly. We only mitigated. Mitigation creates partial resonance, Sarah replied. Bond integrity must still be assessed. She took a seat at our kitchen table, like a judge preparing for deliberation. A small crystalline device floated from her pocket and hovered in front of her. It emitted a soft pulse that Mira's skin responded to, luminescent lines shifting subtly. Sarah glanced between us. Please sit together, she instructed. Proximity is necessary for measurement. Mira and I exchanged a silent, oh stars, oh stars, oh stars, look before sitting side by side. As soon as our thighs touched, Mira's hum deepened, warm and low. Her glow softened into tender gradients. Sarah made a pleased sound. Resonant alignment is strong, higher than accidental. Mira stiffened. It was accidental. Sarah murmured. Is the human aware that the coat still carries your scent imprint? We've talked about the coat, Mira muttered. I blushed. It was warm. And soft, Sarah added. And smelled nice, Mira finished quietly. We both froze. Sarah's smile blossomed like a starburst. Ah, mutual attraction. That will simplify the verification process. We're not, I started. We haven't, Mira protested simultaneously. Oh yes, Sarah said kindly. I can see you have not yet completed. The luminescence pattern is inconsistent. My face heated. Mira glowed pink. Lena chose that moment to wander into the kitchen, hair messy, wearing pajamas, and holding a cup of chamomile tea. She blinked, looked at me, looked at Mira, looked at Sarah. Oh, she chirped cheerfully. The alien kissing inspector arrived early. Sarah blinked slowly, processing. Kissing inspector? That's what I'm calling you, Lena said, unfazed. Mira emitted a high-pitched hum that could only be described as mortification. Sarah took this in stride. I am here to assess bond compatibility. Oh, like chemistry checks, Lena said. Great, they have that here too. For humans, it's mostly vibes and trauma. I buried my face in my hands. Sarah folded her fingers elegantly. We can begin once both parties signal readiness for the mutuality demonstration. Mira inhaled sharply. I nearly choked on oxygen. Demonstration meaning a kiss? I asked, voice cracking like a preteen at choir rehearsal. Sarah nodded. A kiss is the simplest form. The bond does not require prolonged contact, merely sincerity and reciprocal resonance. Mira was glowing so intensely, she could have powered our building for a week. My heart was doing origami in my ribcage. I, Mira whispered, would like to request a moment of privacy. Sarah stood instantly. Of course. Lena pointed her thumb toward the hallway. Guests exit stage left. They both left, shutting the bedroom door behind them. Mira and I stood in the center of the room. The silence so thick you could spread it on toast. She swallowed, eyes flickering in nervous tri-lens rhythm. Her glow trembled. Her hum warbled. I apologize, she murmured. I am overwhelmed. Same, I breathed. She stepped closer. My instincts respond strongly to you, she whispered, voice trembling with sincerity. But I will not force anything. If you do not want this kiss, we can request level 1 documentation only. Her vulnerability hit me like gravity. I took her hands. Her hum stabilized instantly. Her glow softened into a shade I had never seen before. Deep, full, reverent. I want to kiss you, I said quietly. And I want it to be real. Not for them, but for us. Her breath hitched. Then she said, barely audible, May I? I nodded. She closed the distance, and the instant her lips touched mine, her skin erupted in a radiant, breathtaking glow, casting star patterns across the walls. Her hum surged into a harmonic chord that vibrated through my entire chest. My pulse synced to hers in a stunning, visceral wave, and for a moment, the world shrank to her warmth, her glow. The softness of her mouth, and the impossibly gentle way she touched me as though memorizing the map of my humanity. When we finally parted, breathless and slightly stunned, her luminescent patterns pulsed in slow, steady waves of satisfaction. Soft, radiant, unmistakable, bonded. A knock sounded on the door. Sarah's calm voice drifted through. You may open the door whenever you're ready. I believe verification has been achieved. We buried her face against my chest with a mortified, glowing whimper. And I, dazed, floating, heart thrumming in perfect synchrony, wrapped my arms around her and whispered, We definitely need more Danish. I didn't expect, walking to the door, to feel like walking into a destiny I hadn't studied for. But Mira's hand was wrapped in mine, glowing faintly with a steady pulse that vibrated up my wrist, and somehow that made everything feel real, intentional, chosen. She opened the door slowly. Sarah stood outside, with her crystalline device humming a soft, satisfied chord. Lena leaned over her shoulder, sipping tea, like she'd been invited to the world's calmest intervention. Sarah's eyes moved between us, pupils dilating just slightly. Her lips curled. Yes, she said. The resonance is unmistakable. You have achieved mutuality. Period. Mira made a sound somewhere between a flustered hum and a spark of joy. I pretended to cough. Lena pretended not to fist pump. But then Sarah cleared her throat gently, folding her hands as if preparing to recite a very important oath. There remains one final step. My soul left my body. Mira stiffened so hard her glow froze mid-pattern. Final step? I croaked. Yes, Sarah said, pleasantly. You must perform the declaration. I blinked. What declaration? The declaration of intent, Sarah explained. Both parties must state aloud whether they recognize the bond as temporary or pursuing continuity. Continuity. A polite alien word for something more. My throat dried up instantly. Mira's glow fluttered chaotically. Oh, that declaration. Lena whispered, "This is better than any romance show I've ever binged." Sarah stepped forward slightly, the device humming as if holding its breath. "Please, whenever you are prepared." I felt Mira's hand tremble in mine, not from fear, from wanting, and from the enormous, terrifying possibility that I might be the one to break something beautiful if I hesitated. So I squeezed her hand. Soft, steady, intentional, formal. Mike is there with her in practice. Bot and shaman, emotionless and direct. I recognize the bond and acknowledge it as temporary, unless the human expresses intent for continuity. The breath caught in my throat. The room spun. Sarah and Lena both stared at me like I held the final domino in a very delicate line of cosmic events. Mira looked terrified of my answer. And that somehow made the answer easier. "Mira," I said softly, pulling her just an inch closer. "I recognize the bond, and I want continuity." Her entire glow detonated into a warm, breathtaking aurora, gold and violet cascading in waves across her skin. Her hum deepened into a tone so gentle and resonant, it felt like it threaded straight into my heartbeat, weaving us into something new. Sarah smiled. "Acknowledged," she said. "Bond status, mutually continuous. Registration complete." Then she produced something from her pocket, a small translucent badge shaped like a teardrop. "This," she said, placing it in my hand, "is your courtship continuity token. Wear it when visiting our embassy. It will prevent misunderstandings, territorial incidents, or accidental proposals from passing individuals." "Accidental proposals?" I squeaked. "Yes," Sarah replied with perfect calm. "Your cardiological resonance with Mira will be detectable. It may attract attention." Lena spit her tea. Mira looked ready to fight the entire galaxy. "Attention from who?" she demanded sharply. Sarah blinked. "Potential rivals." "Rivals?" Mira and I said in unison. Lena whispered, "Oh my God, I want popcorn." Sarah continued calmly, "But do not worry. Your bond has high compatibility. Interference would be illogical." "That doesn't stop people," I muttered under my breath. Mira stepped protectively closer, her glow tightening in a fierce, jealous halo. "If any attempt is made," Sarah raised a hand, "none will succeed." Then the device flashed once, recording the final data point, and Sarah bowed. "Congratulations on your continuation," she said warmly. "Your bond is harmonious. Deepening will occur naturally over time. And I believe," she smiled like a scientist discovering a new equation, "you will enjoy the process." Before I could ask what deepening meant, Sarah stepped backward and dissolved into a shimmer of light. Lena exhaled through her teeth. "I will never recover from this," she said. "You two just did the alien equivalent of a soft launch relationship announcement with cosmic paperwork." I was still holding Mira's hand, still feeling that gentle hum syncing with my pulse, still stunned that I had just declared continuity, and meant it with a terrifying, exhilarating certainty. Mira's glow softened to a warm, golden blush. You chose continuity, she whispered. I did, I murmured. With you. She stepped closer, so close that her hum vibrated against my chest again. Her eyes shimmered in a pattern I now understood. Affection. And something deeper. I am, she breathed, voice trembling, very glad. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Me too. Her fingertips brushed my cheek. Her glow shimmered. Their hum softened into the tender tone that meant she was feeling something intense and trying very hard not to overwhelm me with it. Would you? She whispered. Kiss me again? I did. Gently, deeply, without any audience or protocol. Her luminescence blossomed like dawn. Her hum enveloped me in warmth, and for a long moment, the world existed only as a soft, glowing curve around us. When she finally rested her forehead against mine, breath warm, glow calm, she whispered, There is one more thing you should know. I swallowed. There's always one more thing. In my culture, she murmured, after a continuity declaration, the claiming coat must be returned. Oh, I said, relieved, that's easy. I'll just go grab it. But, she said gently, cheeks glowing pink gold, once returned, the claimer must present a new coat, one chosen intentionally. I blinked. Like a gift? A continuation vow, she replied quietly. A promise for shared days and warmth. My heart flipped like a novice gymnast. Is this mandatory? I asked. She lowered her gaze shyly. Only if you wish to seal our continuity tradition. I took a slow, deep breath, then smiled. I'll pick out the nicest coat on the planet. Her glow flared in a soft, joyous bloom. That, she whispered, is the correct answer. Lena peeked in again. So, what now? Mira and I looked at each other, then at the glowing token. The coat folded over the chair. The quiet apartment now humming with post-verification warmth. And I said, Well, I think we're dating. Mira nodded solemnly. Yes, that is accurate. Lena fist-pumped. I knew it. Phase 2 begins tomorrow, Mira added. I froze. Phase 2? She smiled, slow, warm, and filled with the promise of 1,000 new beginnings. It involves choosing the coat together. And for the first time in my life, the future felt like something glowing and bright and wildly, impossibly exciting. I grinned. Well then, I said, pulling her close, I'm ready for phase 2. And so was she. Her hum sang softly against my heart. And so was she.